and again, is it's a series, online series that we talk about different things that relate or are related to substance abuse prevention. So that's what Hot Topic Tuesday is. So right now we will be going on Facebook Live. So today, welcome again. So it's a parent wellness series. This is the second of the series. So parenting in a pandemic. So this is something that is of much interest to me. I'm a new parent. My son just turned 1.5 years a couple of days ago. So I want to learn these tips. I want to, be the best to my ability, to be an effective speaker with my child. So that's what we're talking about today. Effective parent and child communication. Before we get started into our conversation with our special guest, there's some tips that I found online, to speak with our children from parent to child. And a lot of it is really making time for your kids. They'll have questions. So for them to feel validated, for them to be heard, it's important that we pay attention to them, whether it's, in how we're looking eye to eye, or allowing the time for them to ask questions. We're not putting it off until later. That's something very important. So you'll see here on the screen, make time for questions, structure and routines, when you can ask, when are we gonna have some time alone, some time together, make sure communication is encouraged, and be genuine, be invested in what they're asking or what they're doing. And that all help with communications. And if you wanna learn more, there's the links there at the bottom of the screen. And now, I'm going to introduce our guest, Angela Perez Bartolome. She is the clinical director of AADAP Inc. She was with us last week, and we're so excited to have her with us again this week. So right now she's a graduate of USC School of Social Work and practicing mental health and co-occurring substance use in the Los Angeles community for the past 10 years. She's also been a community organizer for the past 20 years. Bridging nonprofit platforms with a community-based lens into behavioral health care and service. So Angela, thank you for being here with us.
Hey, thanks for having me again. And I really appreciate the platform plus the community space. So thank you.
So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because we're gonna have a conversation so we can see everyone. All right, so Angela, as you saw, I had some tips on speaking from parent to child, so the parent-child communication. Is there anything else that you would recommend?
Yeah, so there's always, so we can have this conversation last a long time, but I want to make sure it's as functional and as helpful, in how we use it regularly. So yes, I'm a therapist, and I've done all those like the professional way. So I'm also a doctoral candidate in organizational change and leadership. So I specifically work on how to create movement from organizations that are resistant or like want to push back. But I also use these same things a lot of times with my family, when I'm working with patients, or when I'm just like talking to friends, because ultimately the value of communication and any like business side or even family approach is how genuine are we, right? Are we the most present in our conversations? So realistically, I mean, we can't be perfect communicators all the time. I'm not. Like, my attention span sometimes is like of a bee, and then all of a sudden it's like lost somewhere else. So that can be the same with us as parents as well as children. So we also have to be honest with it. It's a practice. It takes practice to be a good communicator. We have to listen to like, hey, how did that sound? Like, if I was the one receiving that, did that make sense? Or was this too much information? Or I know I have a bad habit of like talking too fast. Depends on who's hearing us. Is it well received or not, So I think we've all heard the recommendation of the communication tip, use I statements. Like, I feel this, I hear this. Great. Have we ever used it where we're also communicating what I need as a parent? I need a few minutes to decompress before I can listen effectively. I need some quiet time so I can be able to do whatever, like, so we can do this project together. So I think that parents also can validate that they have certain needs that it's okay to ask for them too, and use those I statements so that you're very deserving of those few minutes, or like, hey, I need to eat before I can have this conversation. And I notice a lot of times it's like everything's rushing, that a lot of the communication gets broken down in the process. Right. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, two things stood out to me. The first one was practice, right? Communication is something we do on a daily basis, not just parent-child, whether it's at work, like you said, with your friends or family members, et cetera, et cetera. So that practice is something that stood out to me. And also the parents' needs. I think a lot of times for parents, they put away those needs to eat, right? To attend to the child. So I appreciate that we have to value ourselves, right? As parents. And for us to be at our best, to communicate, and our other duties is to also have some time for our needs. So that really stood out to me.
Of course, like with the priority that the kids are safe, right? If they're running around with knives and scissors, no, I'm sorry, we're gonna pause and we're not gonna eat right now. We're gonna put these things away, right? But then so a lot of times we need to, one of my favorite tools also is the 80-20 rule. I think, Marlon, we've talked about this briefly, is listening 80% of the conversation and speaking 20. A lot of times that can be used in business or whatever and all these other strategies, but sometimes it's just important to know, like, what is my child saying right now? Not even all the verbal words, but like physical cues, the timing cues of what are they really saying. And if I'm spending 80% of this interaction listening, I'm more likely to be on point when I'm gonna respond, right? And it can be really hard to give that much attention all the time. But of course, like, it's not a strict rule. We'll listen as best as we can, but that's an ideal opportunity so that we can engage in, like, what is it that they're asking? Do they just need a hug right now? Are they just needing attention? Are they wanting to share what they did in school or homework? So those kind of conversations and that practice, like, we can better respond. They might ask you 5 questions, but ultimately they just wanted you to sit with them and give them 2 minutes of your attention. Right. Yeah, go ahead.
If you can comment, there's a question I had for later in the conversation, but we can touch upon it right now. So you mentioned physical cues. So, like, what are some physical cues that help with parent-child communication? And are these certain physical cues, related to culture or, generational, like, differences? Can you touch up a little bit on that?
I think that's such an important point, because there's some people who try to be an expert at, like, oh, physical communication, body language. I'm like, that's a great science. But the thing is, most of us aren't trained to see those nuances, right? But we are trained to see our cultural nuances within our, like, immediate culture, maybe a little further out from, like, let's say my culture of my family or my work office. And then maybe I can see outside of that, like, to other Filipino Americans in my similar, like, ethnic culture. I might see that with other social worker cultures. So we have our, like, cultures that we're more aware of and our cues, right? So we have to be aware that, like, this is different culture to culture to culture. So I don't want to give a blanket statement that every time someone, like, pouts, that means something, like, that they're upset. That for this small person, it might, but also you and your child are building up those cues since they were in infancy, right? You're able to see, like, when they start crying, when they get fussy, what their pouty face is like when they're a little kid, when it frowns a certain way versus, like, oh, that's their, like, daily frown, where they have, like, some kids have just have this natural pouty face, and it's not being upset. It's just that's their baseline. So it's hard to say, to give a blanket statement, because we have to know the specific culture and references we're giving. And also the relationship of how attuned we are to those people or that child. So yeah. Yeah.
We have an interesting comment in the chat. So thank you, Gracie. I feel that a new culture is being developed due to COVID-19.
Definitely agree with that. That's actually a point that I wanted to talk about, but that's actually perfect timing because we in this culture now, most of us, let's say like all of the 2000s, folks born and raised in the 2000s have cell phones, are more familiar with a technological communication. A little bit older than that have more like, it needs more interpersonal communication in that culture. And then same thing with the verbal culture. We all have to learn these cues, and it's so hard to now like advance, like what are we hearing, what are we seeing? Some of the youth are communicating difficulty having expressing themselves verbally. And so they'll vocalize things. So when I hear vocalize, it's like they're making noises, but don't actually make sense all the time with what my culture might interpret as like they're verbally expressing their feelings. No, they're vocalizing that they need something, but that might mean feelings. Yes, Gracie, I think you had another question or?
No, it's actually a comment. It is so true because I was raised that once you're at home, you're sitting on a couch, you're not allowed to watch TV, you're not allowed to look at any technology. You have to pay attention of what everybody was talking, or the conversation, whatever it may be. And now this generation is like, no, like I'm doing homework, like I'm doing research.
Yeah.
And as parents, we're like, okay, well, let me see what you're seeing. Let me see what you're navigating. And at times, like now everything is so advanced. And I'm like, wait, I never saw that before. Like, what is this? Now they're teaching us, like I include myself because I have a 7-year-old, and some of the things that she talks to me, I'm like, wait, I was clueless about what she was navigating. Yes, so it's so true.
Completely agree. And it's interesting when you ask like, hey, can you show me what you're doing? A lot of times they probably aren't telling you like, oh, I'm doing this math, I'm doing this. And like, they're like, here's my screen. We're like, what does that mean? Right? It's very different than how the generations in the 90s, and I grew up in the 80s, 90s. So then knowing that, I was like, oh, we have to communicate and express in certain ways. And now when I have young people I work with, like, oh, they're very articulate via text, but having a harder time with words. So that's another tip, and I recommend for folks is as early as you can, use your verbal communication with your kids. I don't care if they don't understand that you're building those cues and that communication style and that home culture, like from infancy. Even when you're pregnant, they can hear your how fast you speak. They can hear your loudness or your softness. In my family, all of us have like very loud baseline conversational voices. So like when we're around each other, it's not yelling, but somebody else comes in and they're like, why does your family yell? Like, no, that's just how we hear each other. And it's all happy tones. It's just loud. So it's knowing that the cultures are showing to be different. And so when we go to another home, like, oh, they all speak softly or they speak fast, and it's the same thing in a home. There are subcultures that we're adapting to.
Thank you again, Gracie, for sharing that insight, and you as well, Angela. So I have another question for you. So different families have different backgrounds, right? Single parent households, multi-generational, parents and children speak different languages. Like the kids was like in my extended family, the kids are speaking in English and the parents are responding in Spanish, so forth and so forth, right? Is there any, let's say, communication skills that just fits for all, or do you think it's like depends on the situation? And like what are some things that you would recommend for like a tough conversation, let's say about substance use, right? Like how would you go about that, like with different families or different scenarios?
That's actually a really good point, because a lot of like, I don't like giving blanket statements because I don't like knowing in the home. But one pattern that a lot of families do is like ask the kids, why'd you do this? Why'd you do this? So even when you're asking for a nice reason or a not accusatory reason, it can still feel that way because subconsciously we associate why as like, oh, I'm being blamed for something. why didn't you do the dishes? Why did you not why did you kick your brother? I was like, oh, just because my foot swung, versus like what's and how's. What were you thinking when you didn't come home straight right away? How were you able to finish your homework? What did you need so that I could be better supportive for you? Using that what's and how's is more like it doesn't go to our subconscious, doesn't make us feel like, oh, I'm going to get blamed, right? And I think that's a lot that blankets across a lot of cultures, a lot of generations, is that communication style. It goes to this part that like, all right, cool. What's and how's is a little less, it's a little less like it's disarming than the why. Why'd you do that? Even when we ask each other as coworkers or as like friends, why'd you pick going there versus what made you pick that place, that restaurant? It's less like pointing a finger with words.
Yeah, so we have some comments in the chat so what prevented you from calling me to tell me you'd be late?
Yeah.
And we also have on the topic of conversation styles, if children communicate better through text or social media platforms, is it best to pursue that avenue? And how does digital dieting fit into this type of dynamic?
That's also something that you also can catch early and work on changing, or it's also like, hey, it's already so big that we can't undo it. Sometimes it's interesting that like young people will text you their feelings. Okay, cool. Can we also write some words out? What are some, and like encouraging to like incorporate it in, not saying like, okay, you have to stop using your phone, but start weaving it in. Like, hey, I know that you prefer using this, but I'd really appreciate if we could spend like 2 minutes of just using words. And then if you feel the need to, like, text me how you're feeling. Right? So it doesn't feel like so overwhelming. Yes, Gracie.
But sometimes, I feel that texting is like a new language, and sometimes we lose the message at times in a text message, because sometimes it could sound really dry, or it could send like a different kind of message. Especially like when you talk about, like coming home late, sometimes it would seem like so dry, or for example, in my case, I would feel like, oh, I'm in trouble, the way that it was like asked or the statement was written.
Mm-hmm. So then how to mediate that is pick up the call. Like for us as adults, I mean, talking to our kids and we're just like, hey, I don't understand your message. Can you please call me? Like, don't give that approval over the text. Like, I don't understand. It's also okay that we don't know. Like, that's all that you're right, Gracie. It's a new language. And for us to go into speaking one right away, we're just, okay, hold on. Let me tell you where I'm not catching up. Let me tell you where I'm still struggling in seeing your message. Like, you're telling me you're going to be late, but I don't understand why, or what do you need to be home on time? How can I ensure and support you to be home on time? Like those kind of follow-up questions are really important. I think a lot of us were probably raised, I don't know, not everyone, but I was raised where if I tell you something once, that's it. Like, but I don't understand, right? That was one of the conversation styles that my parents had, was like, all right, I'm going to tell you something, and that's it. Well, actually, that's opposite. So some adults would tell me this is what it is, but for my parents directly, it was like, but why that? I don't understand. Why did that happen? So why did that happen? So my parents let me go in a rabbit hole. My mom would answer question after question after question, but my dad would be more like, I don't understand. Like he would just be like, just do it. Like, but I don't understand.
And for us, we couldn't ask why. It was just said to us, and there was, well, and for me, for example, I knew not to ask WHY, why.
Yeah.
No, it was forbidden for me to ask.
Survival
strategy. Yes, it's like why and why and why. So yeah.
Yeah. And so that also brings up another point. Like we have to like the more access we have and the more time we have to be self-aware. It's really hard to be self-aware when the world can be really stressful just surviving. And when we have that time, it's like looking at what is our style. Are we more the passive style where the children are the ones driving the conversation and the approaches? Are we more authoritative where there is a collaboration with parent-child where like the problem solving is done together? Or it can be a little more the neglectful or hands-off style where the communication or the approaches are more letting the connection disappear or not exist. And there's also the authoritarian style where it's like, I'm gonna tell you and that's it, right? And a lot of our cultures, that's especially in immigrant communities, that's all we know, right? That's how we survived. But then us having more time to be a little more aware of ourselves, what's the style that works for us? So I also noticed like, hey, this didn't work for me, so I need to communicate this more. I need to try this out. Like, I like the whole, I can ask my mom, why? So I would, as an adult, I was like, hey, Dad, how can I get you to talk to me more like mom does? I have a hard time understanding. Of course, not all kids are going to communicate like that. Yeah. But it's also, even as an adult, we can figure that practice with a kid, our kids, the people we care about. And of course, we don't care. We're not going to do the work because it's hard.
Yeah, and that leads, for our culture, for Latinos, especially like the males, they can. It's like their feelings stay to themselves. They're not allowed to express how they're feeling. So if they're upset of whatever dad or mom, send them to do, they're not allowed to send that expression. It's a lot easier for females than males. So
that's also social grooming though, because we're seeing a lot more males having emotional distress that look like stomach aches, that look like headaches, that look more like physical ailments, because all these things still existed for them, but the way to express and process isn't the same or wasn't encouraged. Have you seen more ads now that will say like men do cry or men are, communicating, all those things? Those are so factual, but it gets really hard for like someone who wasn't encouraged that in upbringing to have that again. Or so it's funny when I see like mental health, how it shows up. It's like, well, I can't communicate like that. That wasn't encouraged. That wasn't allowed. Or like I was told to stop crying when I had feelings. And it can be very detrimental to their physical health. I don't know what anyone's thoughts are on that. We can end up in a big conversation with that. But
anyone want to share their thoughts?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Oh, if anyone just wants to share their thoughts, because where men do have these same feelings and these communication needs, but a lot of times we, growing up, we didn't know that that was supported or safe.
Yeah, yeah, and it's true, and I mentioned that because I saw it in my brothers, and now that you mentioned the headaches, the stomach aches, that was one of my brothers, actually my youngest brothers. I wouldn't understand because he would go to the doctor and they're like, oh no, it might be stress. But now that you mentioned that he wasn't able to express how he felt, it was that. He always suffered from really, really bad. And it was just like the ache on his stomach, like and whenever he was upset, it was always that ache on his stomach. And now I understand why. This is really interesting.
And that's why, like, us as adults, we have opportunities to change the pattern of how our families worked with us, and no fault of their own. I mean, like, a lot of times these immigrant families, they did what they knew what was best at that time with the resources they had, the reasons that they had to do certain things to survive. So we're not at fault for, the ways that things happen to us, but we are responsible to figure out what works for us or to make those changes, right? And that's the hard part, because it's like, oh shoot, we might have a lot of things to change, or we might have like, oh, I can tweak here and there. we never know. We're always evolving. We're human. We're gonna make lots and lots and lots of mistakes. And I hope we're also very forgiving of that.
I have a question for you, Angela. So on this topic of what Gracie is saying, I've seen in my community, right? In my the machismo, you don't share your feelings, that really limits how you can, communicate. So let's say if someone wants to change their way of communicating with their family, right? Now, it's different from what they experience as a child, what they experience in their community. What kind of support is there to kind of, or what would you tell those parents interested in changing the communication styles with their children, establish a new way of communicating? Like, what would you suggest, or what would you recommend, or what support is available?
I think one of the best supports is like having time to like listen to ourselves. Do I feel like people hear me the way I'm expressing or like making sense of it? When I communicate with adults, do they understand what I'm saying? Does it make sense or match? When I'm speaking to like my kid, do they pay attention to me? Or what is it that I need? And like we're reflecting on like, hey, they make eye contact. Maybe we can practice, hey, I really appreciate if you made eye contact with me when I'm talking. So practicing that, because how would you want to be spoken to? How would you want to be received? And notice like when I'm speaking to someone, I appreciate these things. And this is how I can practice communicating that with my children. Of course, we're gonna like, it's like artwork. The first time you start painting, you don't even know what you did, right? But then you start refining some colors, the skills, and add depth into your style. It's so complex. That's why we're not going to make it like these are the rules, right? But if you make time to practice and just a few minutes to talk every day, those 5 minutes are practice. Like having time to listen is practice. Even to see like, hey, when I was growing up, I think some folks have mentioned like, hey, I liked when my parents did this. I didn't like this when this is how it ended up. So start refining that when you have time, even if it's like, hey, I'm sitting in my car just thinking about what worked out, like what didn't. There's lots of traffic in LA post-COVID life, so it might be a good time to like just reflect on what works and how you want to make the best use of your time. Because I think people have mentioned like young people are communicating so much differently than even just one generation above or below them. So we also have to be flexible that it's going to keep changing.
Yeah, I like that tip. We have a lot of time in the cars, how we use it. I had a ex coworker. He would drive every day from Watts to Pomona. He lived in Pomona. And he said, I'm like, well, what do you do in the car? And he said he would call his parents, he would call his friends. And he was a few years older than me. But to me, it was like weird. Like, I don't really call my friends. I text them, So yeah, that's a good. I do have another question. So we mentioned earlier, like the current day culture is very different. It reminds me of my father-in-law. My father-in-law is 66. My youngest brother-in-law is 14. So it's not just cultural, it's a big age gap, right? So it's generational. He doesn't text. And my brother-in-law, I mean, it's like you said, everyone's saying text messages, video games, that's the way of communication. So a lot of the points I feel that's been made is from a parent point of view, to help understand, our children, or help like that way, right? How can we engage our children to communicate a little bit more, right? When there's different styles of communication, or maybe because I feel if we can open that up, they'll share, what they're seeing at school, or they'll share more of what's going on in their lives and how we can guide, right? So how would you say we can encourage our children to speak more? Because you talked about like the eye contact right now, right? We can encourage eye contact, and that goes both ways. So we're encouraging our children to speak to us, right? Is there anything else that you would say?
Well, with one thing with eye contact, whatever your culture is, if you it's something you want, adapt it. Practice. Like, oh, okay, I could try this out. If it doesn't work and it makes you uncomfortable, why? Is it something that you want to adapt or just not right now? So we're trying things out. With young people, depends on where they're at, because ultimately as parents, we're always in a little more power than where, no, let's be real. We have a lot more power than some kids do, or how they feel, because some might, like 14-year-old, if the parent said, nope, that's not what I'm going to do. All right, shoot, doesn't matter what he wants. The 66-year-old adult is going to win that battle usually, right? So it's also like in the practice of communicating with the people around us. Maybe the 14-year-old is able to watch the communication style, or we're the ones engaging him in different communication style. Like, and ask him like, hey, do you mind if we talk for a few minutes? I know I'm not big on texting. How is that if we just talk? Or like, does that make you uncomfortable? Is it okay? How about we try this out? Because they're talking to their friends in school, but over the past year and a half, they lost all that time and practice. So it's like, might as well practice with what you have at home, right? Or like with what's engaging. And interestingly, a lot of young people are talking on video with people across the country, across the world. So they're learning different communication styles that aren't necessarily like local. So, but ask like, hey, what style works for you? What doesn't? Especially with the folks that are really great into video games, their communication style is global, and it's so hard to pinpoint this is how they do that. Now we're just mixing in so many things in this one house. You have to practice, figure out what's the, like, who's flexible. Is the adult flexible to try these out more? Is the young person more flexible to try these out more? If not, like, you're going to have a lot more resistance to create these patterns of change.
Anybody in the audience would like to comment?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Hi, Angela. This
Hi.
is Carol from Community Prevention. Yeah. Say hello to your mom for me. Huh? Yeah.
Carolyn, super old school.
Yeah. Angela, I mean, I'm listening very intently to what you're saying, and it really reminds me of a literary piece that I read, and it got stuck in my consciousness, And this piece is by a French essayist, Montaigne, and it's all about communication, communication, and it's and as an essayist, he elaborated on why is it that communication is successful between and among people, and there is miscommunication or a lack of communication between and among people. And so he proceeded by saying that it could be because of the relationships. It's rooted in the type of relationships. Like he gave an example, like it seems that parents and children cannot really have successful communication is because in the first place, the relationship between parents and children start from an unequal or are on an equal terms, because parents is parents. Their role exerts authority.
There's power there. Yeah.
Yes, there's the power relations, And so, and he says that, with the perception that you are a friend of this person and the perception of friendship connotes and may really connote equality in terms of relationship. And that's where he says that communication can be successful if people, have perception that the person that they're communicating with is perceived as a friend. So I'd like, I don't know your take about it. Yeah.
I completely agree. In the parent-child role, I feel like there's so many things that make a true friend behavior not the healthiest, but they're in the communication approach and how like looking at it as equals, where one doesn't have to step and like use power all the time to communicate. That's I think that can be just so subjective of the situation, right? But I do believe that with the relationship, you can get more out of it. That's where you can, like I think the Marlon's example of the 66-year-old parent and the 14-year-old child, the huge gap depends on the communication in that relationship. I've seen those relationships with the same age gap, but because one has that like openness and that flow, we shorten the gap because you open up the relationship to go outside of your specific comfort zone to reach out of that. So yes, I completely agree that relationships make language and communication and connections a lot more valuable. So where like your relationship with your child, if they get upset and yell at you, you know that they don't hate you. They're just having a moment. They might say, I hate you, but they're still just having another moment, right? I think someone said, and sometimes it's a phase when kids aren't communicating to their parents, they may feel a sense of independence when dealing with certain situations. Yeah, they are very much trying to test out these limits and these boundaries from being, especially in adolescence, where they're like parent and child, always being under their parent, especially when they're little kids, right under them. They need that relationship. But the older they're getting, they're pushing that relationship to have new roles and new boundaries and new space, so that communication is needed so that they can practice independently. Sometimes they'll use communication just to push you hard away from them because they're trying to be independent, right? But this conversation can go really long if you all want to, but these are part of the why the relationship, the role, the style, all these things, the nonverbal, are part of the communication like spectrum. We're not going to run out of ways to practice. We're not going to run out of like things to mess up on. There's just so many ways to take it too. And also knowing like, that's why we talk about the family culture, the subcultures in a home. All of those take consideration. But that's why you got to just try it out. Practice. Hey, if I use a higher voice with my kids, what's the response? If I text them all the time for this week, what's their response? Do you get the flow and engagement that you need also as a parent to feel connected to your kids? Because I know different parents have different ways of expressing love. Some people it's verbal, some people it's hugs. Some of the young kids don't have the same communication style, right? So we can go into like so many different ways of that, but thank you, Carol. That's such a really, really poignant perspective, that it is the relationship that makes communication what it is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Gracie, you have your hand up?
Yes, so I wanted to add, do you think that this is why also sometimes it's hard to communicate when parents had their child at a really young age? So they're around like the same phase, and it's really hard, to maintain that communication, in the sense that once they become a teen, they're trying to like say like, hey, you got to take this route instead of this route. This happened because I took that route. I know you're smiling because you understand what I'm trying to say. So do you think that may be a cause as well?
There's so many things with adolescents, especially when parents are the same age or really far apart. It depends on the dynamic of how the parent-child in the relationship is, because sometimes parents can, no matter what age, try hard to be a friend. And then that dynamic of like, I'm trying not to have you fall through the same pitfalls that I did. It's like, but they need to. Just hopefully they're not any that like permanently break anything, right? And it's because there's a lot of love in that you're trying to protect, but some of that protection requires a distance. And to communicate that is like, I want you to figure this out. The earlier we can practice the communication with a child so that they learn how to problem solve is also how they're going to problem solve communicating or processing these their independence, their young adulthood, their mess ups, and also when they need help. So those are all so many different ways to approach it, but we can be as like proactive as possible, that the younger that they are in communicating that it's okay to mess up, and I'm still here to help you out when you do.
And this is, including substance, some of the parents, that's what they express. Oh, I don't want you to drink, or I don't want you to smoke, or I don't want you to do drugs because of X, Y, and Z that happened to me. So that's when that communication comes, and the teenager, reacts to it. It's like, hey, but you did it, so how come it's not okay for me to do it?
Yeah, and every family dynamic is different. Like, I'm going to use an example that I grew up with, is that my mom let me ask why, but why, I don't understand why, like a dozen times, and she would just keep answering. Then I was like, then she gave me the conversation of like, you're going to drink, you're going to smoke, you're going to try this out. You might not like it, you might like it, but you have to let me know just so that we can communicate. I was like, you're not going to get mad, but why? And she gave me so much that I didn't drink, and like I didn't have my first drink, or I never smoked a cigarette until I was 21. I was like, this isn't fun. I was like, you killed all the excitement out of it because you just overtold me, and I basically, all my expectations were already met before I really realized it. Has anyone ever experienced it where when they tell you at the dentist, like, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to drill, and then we're like, your brain, it's not so nerve-wracking for folks? Or is it like, hey, you just let the dentist just do whatever and they don't tell you anything? Which one makes it more scary?
I was like, let's just get it over with.
You're
I
the
don't
one-
like the dentist.
You don't want to know? Yeah. But like subconsciously, our brains, if we can set up a realistic expectation that's maybe a little more scary, or a little more like more of the details, our brains are already like bracing ourselves, and we're a little more I think a lot of people, my bad, sorry, dentist example is bad, but we're a little more like, okay, this is going to happen, and then it's going to be okay. And like what my dentist did the other day, I was like, okay, this is going to be a 20-minute procedure. I'm going to open your mouth, I'm going to put the clamps in. I was like, okay, cool, that was fine. The last one I had was like, they just went at it. I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? Oh my gosh, now they're like holding my mouth. Like, my brain didn't know how to prep for what was going to happen next. But the more we can communicate how to prep, our brains are a lot more able to be like, okay, then I'm going to go on this roller coaster. I'm going to hear the click, click, clicks, and then I'm going to go down, and then it's going to be okay. It's only going to be 15 seconds. And, our brains have a lot more like ability to hold on. But yeah, sorry, I won't use the dentist example anymore. It's not everyone's favorite. But that's usually one of those examples that help people like know what to expect with a dentist.
Yes, thank you for everyone communicating that they don't like going to the dentist. I have one last question before we start wrapping it up. So let's say, we build this communication style, it's open. There are children speaking to the parents are being open and, attentive to what the children are saying. What if they ask you something about why is marijuana bad, but it's legal, or questions about sex because of their friends are saying it at school? And what if you just don't know the answer? Like what can you tell parents? Like, I don't know.
And that's okay to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure. So my mom's a nurse, and I asked this question. I was like, Mom, are you a virgin? And oh my gosh, I got the like longest conversation. It's like, but she gave me all the details. Like, all right, well, I'm done with that. I don't want to ask any more questions. Like, it was so much information. It was really helpful for me as an adult to understand what the honest process was. But I was like, Madonna said like a virgin. So I just, I didn't need all that information, but it was just prepping the conversation. And I know a lot of parents would be like, what? It's okay to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure if I'm comfortable answering that by myself. Or let's figure out who's a good person that can help us figure this out. Or let's Google. Sometimes they're asking you about a math problem that nobody knows how to figure out because they're doing Common Core and nobody knows that anymore. Like, who's had to do Common Core with their kids? Because the first time I was asked for help, I was like, how is this kindergarten stuff and I'm getting it wrong? But yeah, I had to look it up, how to do Common Core fractions for a kindergartner. And we looked up YouTube because to give us an example of how to make sense of this. Good thing there's Google. Good thing there's still libraries or friends who can better explain. I've had to explain to my friends' kids about different things because their parents were uneasy about answering, and that's okay. If you don't know, it's better to tell them that you don't know and we'll figure this out versus like giving them a lie or something that will ultimately like be inconsistent to what the truth might look like when somebody else exposes them to it. Whoever heard like, oh, marijuana is so bad, it's going to do this, and then it's a gateway drug, and then all this other stuff. And then when they actually try it, it wasn't that bad. I think that would be more of the concern, right? That the honest answer might open up more curiosities and you're not the go-to trusted person anymore.
Thank you. So we have a couple minutes for any questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat.
Or just say them out loud. I really appreciate
say them out loud.
It makes me feel like I'm not talking to myself all the time. Thanks.
While our audience think of any questions, let me know if you would agree with this statement. You know, as parents, we have to be intentional with our communication. There's a purpose. Right? Do you think that's accurate or is more complex than that? What would you say?
I think yes and no. Yes, we always try to be mindful and communicate well, but no, because we're going to mess up a lot. We're going to just like say some things flat out and it didn't make sense to us. Sometimes we're just having a conversation to have a conversation. I like with my friends. So with my friends' kids, I don't know anything about Minecraft, but I'm going to have an hour conversation about it. Just because I can bring out a long conversation out of any kid right now. Like, want to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh? I'll pull out my deck too. Just sometimes just to bring up the practice of the communication. So it doesn't always have to be this huge, like, ooh, I'm going to talk about like something valuable and it's going to like be mind blowing, right? Sometimes it's just like, nope, we'll talk about Minecraft. Just because I want you to know that I'm an adult you can talk to about Minecraft, dating, whatever.
Out of college, I never knew I was going to learn so much about Roblox and anime. That's me working with the youth. That's what they talked about. That's what they knew. And I would ask them, you know, so I appreciate that. So we have, I believe, Gracie unmuted. Gracie, were you saying something?
Yes, I wanted to add that I personally made some changes. You know, becoming a parent, there is some lifestyles that I changed, and one of them is to talk to my daughter and my son. When, you know, what made me open my eyes was when my daughter came up to me and she said, "Mommy, I'm free to express my emotions. They taught me that in school." And I said, "You know what? And I'm really proud of you that you're doing that." You know, and she said, "And you don't get mad at Alex because he's crying." I'm like, "No, because just like you, Alex has the right to show his emotions." And, you know, she expressed how she saw in school that one of the moms got mad at her sons for crying. And she was shocked that I didn't react because my son was crying. But I told her, just like you learn in school that you're okay to show your emotions, so is your brother. You know, and that made me realize that I started making a change, because in my house, my brothers weren't allowed. My male cousins weren't allowed to show those emotions. Yeah, so It takes for one person, one individual, maybe just that one parent to make that change.
I completely agree. And I really appreciate that's one of the
Thank you, Gracie.
remarks at this time, because we all were brought up however we were brought up, right? But it only takes one of us to break up those patterns of behaviors.
Mhm.
Even for ourselves, when we're saying hey, I grew up in a household full of addiction and I'm in treatment now. I'm doing this now. It takes only one of us to make that change. It might not always be us in this moment. Maybe it's our future selves. Maybe it's our kids, but those are always so important that you can show that it can be different. So I commend you for just, being open to something different than what we always knew. Us as individuals, we're always adding to our knowledge base, our experience, and hopefully we're refining the practice so that we can better take care of each other as a collective. And I think Christina shared a really great resource. If of anyone, when people have things to donate or share, this is an opportunity that somebody might be able to use, from donation of clothes to a donation of information. The more collective we can approach things, I think it's more healing and a lot more space for mess ups to just keep moving forward together.
Thank you.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm glad that I'm really appreciating the shares that are taking place, because it reminds me of my own experience with my parents and then the little ones that I'm raising, because to make those shifts to improve communication and just also relations within families, especially during this pandemic. Because listen, I got tired of looking at the same faces, because you really start to realize areas that need to be improved as a family, especially during this pandemic. And so something that I've realized is that we've all had to challenge, interrupt, and even break cultural rules and norms in order to improve as a family. Because for example, I'm a Tongan American woman. And so deference is an important value in our culture, deference to elders. So the humble and willing submission to our elders. And so you ain't never too old to get yelled at by your parents. I'm grown. I still get scolded by my parents. And there's times where I had to just be no, I'm not listening to this counsel you're giving me, because it's against how I choose to live my life and how I choose to raise the littles that I'm raising. And so for others, it's how disrespectful, how you gonna talk back to your parents? But for me, it's what's healthy for me and the kids that I'm raising. And so I've had to challenge that deference, that sense of deference to the elders within my household in order to sustain what I feel is more healthier for me and who I'm raising. And then in the same token, that got reciprocated to me, because there were some comments I made to the kids. And then the next day, my niece was you told me this wasn't a big deal, but it was a big deal to me and it really hurt my feelings. And I was bro, I just got dished the same thing that I dished to my mom in the same week. And so I think it's important to acknowledge those areas where where cultural norms have to be pushed, and then to also be okay with being pushed. When I'm not reciprocating what I know, I'm dishing out.
Cool. Thank you. That's awesome. I really appreciate that. You're exactly right. That just is. We have to be ready to receive that, and also receive it and know hey, they want me to be better. These littles want you to take care of you so that you can take care of them in this in a very healthy way. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. I appreciate that. So just sharing in the chat or the resource. So if anyone on Facebook or watch the recording or in the audience, if you know of anybody, they're looking for organizations or families who would like donations of clothes and accessories for girls size 5. So if you know of anyone, feel free to get in contact. And speaking of contact, let me share the PowerPoint again, and we'll do the contacts. Sorry, everyone. We are wrapping up. So thank you, Angela, for being here with us, and I'm really appreciative of the audience for engaging in this conversation with us. So we're nearing the end at 5 o'clock. So closing remarks and announcements. Our next Hot Topic Tuesday will be on August 24th. So 2 weeks from now, we will kind of speak about youth and, going back to school, what they might see, and, if it includes vaping and other drugs or something, how to say no. So that will be the topic in 2 weeks. This is the contact information with Angela. Again, Angela, thank you. She is awesome. She's also the clinical director here at AADAP, and she helps the agency a lot. She's very valued. There's her email. If you have any questions you want to follow up with, feel free to contact her. So we are from Asian American Drug Abuse Program, AADAP. That is our address. That is our website. Feel free to email at info@aadap.inc, aadapinc.org for any information, or give us a call. There's also the social media handles for the AADAP pages. And then our team that does a Hot Topic Tuesdays, community prevention. So we have our community organizers in Gardena with Tracy and Jessica. There's their contact information, so feel free to take a screenshot. Tiffany Tan over at El Segundo, Richard and Carson, myself and Inglewood. And then we have Carol and Jeannie that cover the rest of the South Bay. If you want to follow us on social media, see some clips from previous Hot Topic Tuesdays, feel free to follow us at these social media pages on Facebook and on Instagram. And if you want to know a little bit more about us, aadapinc.org, community prevention. And if you want to see a recording for this presentation, go to Facebook Live on SBC3 Facebook page. You'll find the recording there, or go to YouTube. So this will be up on YouTube in 2 to 3 days on AADAP's channel on YouTube. And with that, we'll say bye to Facebook Live. Thank you for joining with us. Thank you everyone for being here. We appreciate you, and we'll stop recording and have a wonderful Tuesday. So